Number 10. Jean Grey was resting the whole time. After Jean Grey died as part of the Phoenix Saga, everyone was left flabbergasted. During the story, we'd seen Jean merge with the Phoenix Force, become insanely powerful, lose control over this power, become corrupted and dark, basically become a huge supervillain, and finally sacrifice herself, knowing that if she didn't, it would only end badly. Or worse than badly, because it was already pretty bad. Jean Grey, one of the original X-Men team, was dead. Or so it seemed. Later on, Marvel would want to revive the original X-Men team and bring them together on a new team and comic series called X-Factor. So Jean needed to come back to life. But hey, she was dead. So we got the added story to explain that the version of Jean that had died wasn't really her, but was a separate entity known as Phoenix. Sort of this merged thing. Wasn't really Jean. Jean herself was resting comfortably in a pod beneath the ocean, still lived, and would be able to return. Yay. Number 9. Tony Stark was adopted. Yep, that's the thing that happened. I'm just wondering if this one will show up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I can't deny that if we get an Arno as a result, an Arno Stark, I would actually not be too upset with that, even though this retcon's pretty weird. The reason this retcon was such a terrible retcon for Tony was that his parents and their loss always remained a great catalyst and huge emotional plot point for him. Now, of course, just because he was adopted doesn't mean that he can't still love his parents as much as he did and still be as emotionally affected by their death. That's not what I'm saying. But his parents also had a naturally born son that they hid from Tony, who was born before they adopted Tony, and he also didn't know that he was even adopted. Also, there were aliens and alien tech involved in Arno's birth, which explains why this all had to be a secret, but also it's just a lot. All in all, this revelation greatly changed the way Tony saw his parents and made their relationship more complex. And I don't know if either of those things needed to happen. Number 8. Hail Hydra. One of the most shocking moments in Marvel's comic history was when it was revealed that Captain America was actually a sleeper agent for Hydra the whole time. Say what? The guy who for years was diametrically opposed to Hydra and all their beliefs, who had tried and succeeded to foil their plots countless times, was a Hydra agent? How could this be? Well, apparently all those wins were a part of his doing a very good job to convince us all and trust him so that he could stab us in the back at the right moment and take over America, becoming Hydra Supreme. Fortunately, this evil version of Captain America would later be revealed to have been created by Kobik, a living sentient version of the Cosmic Cube who was manipulated into making this retcon happen. What's more, the true Captain America still existed within the shards of the Cosmic Cube and would return once more to defeat his evil self, fixing the timeline. So, I mean, at least this retcon ended up not staying permanent, but still, it's pretty weird. Number 7. Xorn. Okay, so I was actually going to make the title of this point a little more explanatory, but then I realized how long that would actually make the title of this point. Okay, so Xorn was basically a character who showed up in the comics who was a mutant who always needed to wear a mask. Because of this, we never saw Xorn's face, leading many to wonder who is really under the mask. Although I think most people just thought, well, it's probably a new mutant because, you know, we get new mutants added to the comics every day. But no, of course, this is comics, so it had to be someone. In a dramatic twist, it was Magneto. But no, of course, this is comics, so it had to be someone that we already knew. In a dramatic twist, it was revealed to be Magneto, who had infiltrated Xavier's school in order to rally up mutant support and help him create an army. He then destroyed New York, shot Emma Frost, killed Jean, and was eventually killed by Wolverine. Later on, however, Magneto would turn up again because, well, he's Magneto, and writers wanted to inch him closer to that line between villain and anti-hero again, so they basically retconned Magneto's involvement in all of this. It turns out there was a real Xorn, and it was actually Xorn's brother impersonating Xorn, impersonating Magneto, who was really to blame. Wow. Just wow. Number 6. Ugly equals evil. That's what Thanos' retcon taught us. Yep. Thanos' backstory was added in detail in the series Thanos Rising, and what many fans were surprised to learn was that his mother was apparently driven mad by her newborn baby's hideous appearance, and because of his appearance, claimed that she needed to kill him. That's pretty terrible. She sensed basically that because he was ugly, he would also be supremely evil. And the really shocking part of this was, of course, that she was right. But also, what the heck? Just because you don't like the look of your baby doesn't mean it should deserve to die. Fortunately, a retcon was later added to fix this when it was changed to it not being the baby's appearance but to a specific deviant gene in the child's genetic code that concerned both of his parents instead. Still, not great just analyzing your baby's genes and being like, we already know you're gonna be evil, but it's better than it just being about the ugliness in appearance as the pure reason for condemnation, I guess. Number 5. Doom is never wrong. Some people like Dr. Doom a little too much. I'm probably guilty as being one of those people. To the point that they can't let him be flawed. Doom must be perfect. Well, while Doom may believe that, the reality is it's his flaws that actually help to make him such a great character, and also are important because they are a part of the reason for his villainous nature. Originally, his vendetta started against the Fantastic Four, and more specifically Reed Richards, years ago, when Reed tried to give him pointers on a device he was building. Reed warned Doom that it was unstable, but Doom didn't listen. The device ended up exploding because, well, Richards had been right, scarring Doom's face. Unable to blame himself due to his huge ego, Doom decided to blame Reed, and thus a villain was born. However, retcons have come into play a few times in regards to his origins as to whose fault the device exploding really was. In one retcon, it's actually implied that it's Mephisto's fault, but if that's true, then why has Doom hated Reed so much for pretty much forever? Another retcon implied that Ben Grimm possibly intentionally sabotaged Doom's machine, which is an even worse retcon because it makes Grimm, normally a very lovable character, look like a jerk. Both of these retcons help to buff out Doom's flaws at the expense of making his feuds illogical. Number 4. Peter and MJ's marriage never happened. During the story One More Day, Peter made a pact with Mephisto to ensure that his Aunt May would live. Part of this deal was also that people would forget Peter's secret identity, which was currently out in the open. Although it wasn't like a bargain part of the deal, it was just a thing that would happen. But what did Mephisto want in return for this? Peter to never be a hero again? Did he want his soul? No. No, 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 no. He wanted his marriage? Mephisto wanted to take Peter's marriage to MJ. And by that, I don't mean that he wanted himself to marry MJ, which would actually make, in a weird turn of events, more sense. I mean, he wanted to make it so that their marriage never existed. This was such a strange request that many were left speechless when Peter agreed, and this actually happened. What was likely really going on is that Marvel no longer wanted Peter to be married. Or Joe Quesada never wanted Peter to get married in the first place. They wanted to return to the days when Peter was flying free and single, so this story happened to erase it. Number 3. Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy's relationship. This little frightening retcon was added during the Sins Past story. It also made Peter look like an insensitive jerk, just for good measure as well. The story here that was added in was that Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn, a man who was much older than her at the time and who would go on to be responsible for her death. This affair resulted in Gwen becoming pregnant with twins, which she secretly gave birth to. Norman then raised these children, lying to them that they were actually the children of Spider-Man and Gwen, and that Spider-Man had killed their mother, turning them into misguided villains. This was not a retcon anyone needed, but hey, it was one that we got. Number 2. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were never mutants. If you have been subscribers to our channel for a while, then you likely saw this one coming from a mile away. A list of the worst retcons with Amanda hosting it? I wonder what she's gonna rank high up on that list. And you were right. One of the worst retcons in mutant history for me will always be this. During the events of Axis, it was revealed that Wanda Maximoff and her brother Piotr, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver respectively, were never the children of Magneto, and as such, never mutants. Instead, we learned that the High Evolutionary abducted them when they were young, experimented on them, and then disguised them as mutants and returned them back to the world. Why? Well, we don't really know, which is part of the reason this is such a terrible retcon. That, and it erased years of meaningful family drama and history, and created a bunch of plot points that no longer really made any sense. Number 1. Snap Wilson. Even worse than my own personal nerd rage towards the retcon of the Maximoff twins, everyone's outrage, my own included, against this retcon. I still can't believe this was a thing that even happened in the comics. Oh my goodness. Sam Wilson in the comics became a good friend of Captain America and was even known as his ally, the superhero Falcon. However, it was revealed that Sam Wilson wasn't actually Sam Wilson, a social worker from New York with falconry skills. This was all a fabrication of the Red Skull, who had used the Cosmic Cube to turn him into the perfect partner for Captain America as part of an insidious plot. The true persona of Wilson was the criminal, thug, and pimp known as Snap Wilson. What? This would be revealed to Cap as being his true persona, which Cap would then save him from. Yikes. Fortunately, years later we would see a retcon that would basically undo this one, turning the fake persona of Sam Wilson into the real persona for him, and the originally retconned real persona of Snap Wilson into the fake, meaning that Sam Wilson was always Sam Wilson and Snap Wilson was the version created and used by Red Skull. Whew, thank goodness. Number 10. Hank Pym's secret daughter. Nadia Van Dyne is Hank's daughter, who we didn't know existed until 2016. She was introduced in a free comic book day issue about Civil War II. Now of course I like Nadia Van Dyne as a character, don't get me wrong, but her being added in retroactively as Hank's lost daughter was something that I felt like was a bit much. When we learned of Nadia's backstory, we learned that she was the daughter of Hank Pym and his first wife, Maria Travoia. Maria was kidnapped during her and Hank's honeymoon and killed. Nadia ended up being raised in Russia, trained in the Red Room. Eventually she escaped after learning of who her parents really were. By the time she got back to America though to see her father, Nadia learned of his sacrifice to save the world from Ultron and his death as a result. She decided to seek out her stepmother Janet Van Dyne and became close enough to her that she felt compelled to change her own last name to Van Dyne, because that's not confusing at all. She's Hank's daughter, she's not at all related to Janet, and yet she has her last name. Number 9. Falcon's X-Gene. Remember that time Falcon was revealed to be a mutant and then we explained that origin away with, a faulty Sentinel? If you don't, let me explain. In issue 174 of Captain America, we see Professor X meeting Falcon and Cap. Charles implied Falcon's connection to his bird seemed telepathic, and that Falcon's telepathic abilities may be mutant in origin. Falcon himself took this suggestion to heart and even considered what it might mean for him to be a mutant, pondering on his strong, seemingly psychic link to his bird Redwing. He then encountered a Sentinel who identified him as a mutant, and so he was a mutant for a time. This was established, and this wouldn't really be revisited or retouched till 2001. Where the idea of Falcon being a mutant was tossed in the trash and explained away as a Sentinel simply malfunctioning. Wah wah wah. Number 8. Black Widow's confusing backstory. Natasha being a mysterious spy from Russia who switched sides means that yes, we are going to get a complex backstory for her, but it actually wasn't always that complex. Natasha was inspired to fight for her nation originally when her husband was assumed dead in combat. Her husband wasn't really dead of course, and it was implied that this was all part of a plot to basically encourage her to fight for her country. Before that, Natasha was a renowned ballerina. Later on, however, this whole origin was revealed to be a lie when we learned that the Red Room had embedded memories of her being a ballerina in her mind. They made her think she had trained in ballet, but she hadn't really, because I guess that's what the Red Room does, they mess with you and give you fake memories. Her story was also changed from a woman who was inspired by her husband's sacrifice to put her own life on the line for her country as well, to that of a woman being blackmailed and threatened into becoming a spy in order to protect her husband. Number 7. Professor X married Mystique. Some retcons that are really strange come from film inspiration. As a lot of people discussed in the comments, many feel that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, for example, would still be mutants today if it wasn't for their being introduced in the MCU's Avengers franchise, which didn't have the rights to include mutants, so we had to kind of unmutant them. I feel as though the case was possibly similar for this weird, secret retcon. In 2013's Uncanny X-Men issue 24, we learned of Mystique and Charles Xavier's secret marriage, meaning that the child we saw Mystique gave birth to while in the guise of Moira McTaggart was likely one willfully conceived, as opposed to Mystique tricking Charles into sleeping with her, which would have been super weird and pretty not good in my opinion. In the X-Men prequel films such as First Class, which came out in 2011, we see a different kind of relationship between Raven and Charles. We get this weird love triangle between Charles, Raven, and Eric, and it seems more of that likely influenced this weird retcon plot point revealed in the comics, in Charles's will. Number 6. Thanos. Number 1 dad? Thanos has never really been known as a caring and kind person. Even the people he keeps close to him are never really fully safe from his wrath. Faithful servants, family members, to Thanos, everyone is pretty much disposable. The same could be said for his adopted daughter Gamora, who he hardened and transformed into a killer until she ended up later rebelling. In the 2019 Thanos series, however, we learn how Gamora's relationship with her father was, well, more complex. How he actually, in his own way, was kind of a good father to her. This series also highlights how much they both cared for each other, despite the fact that an Infinity Gauntlet, which happened in the 90s, pre this series, but in terms of continuity would have taken place after this, Thanos seems to not show any regard for his adopted daughter's life. So, it's kind of a retcon. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Number 5. Spider-Man's non-sister. So this is kind of another retcon that for me is similar to Nadia's. I like the idea of this character, but the whole story involving her is, well, it's pretty wacky. Teresa showed up in Amazing Spider-Man Family Business claiming to be Teresa Parker, Peter's sister. She believed she was the daughter of Richard and Mary Parker, Peter's parents, and we got a few cool adventures with her, assuming this belief to be true. She was retconned into existence, but honestly, I thought she was kind of a cool retcon to add in, so I was cool with that. However, things got weirder when we learned that the secret sister we'd never heard of till now was all a lie, and that Teresa actually wasn't who she said she was, despite what she herself had been manipulated to believe. It was all a trick, and Mentalo had manipulated Teresa into believing it herself. It was all part of Kingpin's plan to basically lure Peter to a tomb. And we don't actually even know who Teresa's parents are now. It's still a mystery. They even manipulated how Peter saw Teresa, making her appear more like him, so she'd look more like his sister. It's weird. I wish she was actually his sister. That would have been cooler, I think. Number 4. Spider-Destiny. Now you know me, I love the Spider-Verse, I love Spider-Totems, but not all fans share my bizarre obsession with the Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon stories and the villains known as the Inheritors. I swear I'm like the only person that really loves the Inheritors. If you also love them, let me know in the comments. Show yourselves. With these stories came a pretty huge retcon, which basically implied via learning about the Great Web and the Spider-Totems placed within it that every spider, man, or person had a kind of destiny to become that spider person. In other words, Peter Parker didn't have a freak accident, he was actually destined to become Spider-Man. It was fate! Many fans were not a fan of this change to his origins, as they felt it detracted from what makes Peter Parker so appealing. That he's just an average kid who got a freak spider bite that gave him powers, as opposed to it being all ordained. Number 3. Kang. Sometimes we talk about retcons that are ridiculous because they hurt the overall story. Other times there are retcons that feel like they don't really need to happen, and then there are those that just cause more confusion than really necessary. That's sort of the case with Kang. Kang the Conqueror was a villain who was first introduced in Avengers issue 8 in 1964. He is known for being a time-traveling villain who enjoys sitting and floating around while menacing other people. As time went on, however, we'd come to discover, due to the fact that he's a time traveler, the Kang was actually a bunch of other people, including Immortus and even Iron Lad. While these retcons were sometimes interesting, they don't really add much to his story, and at this point Kang being revealed as just about anyone is so old hat, it's kind of lost its shock value as well. Now we're gonna get him in the MCU, I don't know what that's gonna be like. Could be weird, could be great. Number 2. Aunt May's death. Remember when Aunt May died, but it wasn't really Aunt May but an actress who had actually died while impersonating Aunt May? Yeah, that was a weird villainous plot. What we saw in the comics as an elderly Aunt May's death was later retconned into being one of the weirdest and most elaborate plots of Green Goblin's criminal career. It was later revealed that the woman who was dead and buried and who we thought had been Aunt May was actually an elderly actress who happened to be on her deathbed and who had agreed to take on one last role in order to torment Spider-Man? Prove how great of an actress she was? Her motives are pretty foggy. Maybe Green Goblin agreed to pay any surviving relatives of hers a ton of cash? I honestly don't know. What had really happened was this actress had been genetically altered to exactly match Aunt May's genes, meaning no one at the hospital suspected this imposter to be a fake. She died after revealing to Peter that she knew he was Spider-Man, and was even buried in Aunt May's intended plot next to Uncle Ben for a time. That is, of course, until we all learned that Aunt May was really still alive, and this had been some kind of bizarre ruse. Number 1. Clone Saga. I won't deny that in my time on this channel I've come to actually somewhat love elements of the Clone Saga. I originally disliked Clone Saga when I started working here, but I very much have come to appreciate parts of the story and to acknowledge that without Clone Saga, we wouldn't have some very awesome characters like Ben Reilly and Kane Parker. However, one thing I still cannot get over is how long Marvel spent tricking everyone with this story. People spent 20 years thereabouts thinking they were reading Spider-Man, as in Peter Parker, only to find out that all those stories were not his, but actually belonged to a clone. Granted, at least it was a pretty cool clone who we'd all come to love after. But at the time, this was a pretty shocking and frustrating revelation after years of stories, and it left a lot of fans feeling betrayed at the time.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Superman's Secret. Ooh. So in Superman issue 300 back in 1939, we see the front cover of this issue and it shows in big text, "Revealed at last, the startling secret of how Superman fools the world with his Clark Kent identity." And you see Superman on the cover like, "Lana, look at my face. Do you believe me?" He's on point, like he's very aggressive. He's like, "I'm Clark Kent, look at my face." It's basically what we've all been thinking when we see this guy in his disguise. The whole issue is about how dumb the glasses disguise is. And it's pretty funny at first. But the thing that sucked was that he explained how his glasses are made from Kryptonian plexiglass and how that intensifies the low-level hypnotic effect, so people see him as Clark Kent rather than Superman. So he can be dressed in his gear and people are like, "No, you're definitely Clark Kent, I'm looking right at you. Your chest is the size of a car, but you know what? I think you're still Clark Kent." It wasn't until Byrne's 1986 reboot until this power was dropped. Thankfully. Because if they had kept that idea, then it would have made the comics where Bruce Wayne pretends to be Superman pretty unnecessary. Also, if Superman has these powers in comics or movies, that would just be hilarious. It would just be Henry Cavill at the bar in his Superman gear just flexing, then a guy pours a beer on his head while we're just staring at him in costume. That would have just been weird. That guy should have been punched out to space also. Forget about his truck being stuck in trees. He should have grabbed him and just went, gone. Number 9, One Punch Man. Superboy Prime punches through reality itself. It is one of the most talked about events in DC's comic book history, and it has fans split over the overall decision. Crisis on Infinite Earths happened and brought together all these Golden Age and Silver Age heroes into the same place. It was a move made to retcon certain plot points while setting up a brighter and certainly bolder future. So what happens when you lock Superboy Prime up in a pocket universe? Well, once he's out, he gets so mad that he punches, but he doesn't just punch a hole in the wall like your classic Kyle from high school. No. He punches through reality, creating the multiverse, bringing back the dead Robin from the 80s, Jason Todd, to life. And that wasn't the only change though when it comes to the multiverse collapsing. Like Elastigirl's resurrection, and then the other characters come back as if they had truly never died. Like we had Lynx, Reactron, Ventriloquist, Scarface, and Magpie. This punch also changed some major history with Joe Chill, which I'll get into later. The numerous versions of General Zod were also replaced by just the one version. So, what a mess. Just what a mess. Number 8, Catwoman's origin. Okay, this one's super funny to me. So, Frank Miller released Batman Year 1, and it was this dark and gritty issue. And included with it had Selena Kyle's true origins. She lived life on the streets and resorted to work just to make ends meet. People loved this dark origin story. This was a superhero origin story. Then the New 52 released Catwoman 0 in 2011, and the origin went from dark and DC-like to just, well, this. She is seen as this amateur thief, and she has an epiphany while falling out of a window, and she smacks the ground quite hard. And then, out of nowhere, a group of stray cats appear and start to lick her back to life. Look at her face, getting all sticky. First of all, the sound. Second of all, the smell. Wouldn't be the best. Basically just doing what Tim Burton did, but on the page. No way. Number 7, after the New 52 retcon, we saw Barbara Gordon in an entirely new way. So Alan Moore released The Killing Joke, and in this comic we see a paralyzed Barbara Gordon from the waist down. She then became Oracle and did a pretty bang up job with the Bat family. Also, she's in a wheelchair. How often do you see that? More inclusion for the win, folks. Let's get it. But with the New 52 retcon, we have Barbara Gordon back as Batgirl. So while some fans are happy with the change, most have expressed quite a bit of rage online, rightfully so. Number 6, Identity Crisis. Brad Meltzer's Identity Crisis was a 7-part issue released back in 2004. The first issue actually did really well with pre-orders, passing I think like 160,000. But come issue 2, fans weren't nearly as interested the first time around. There was a huge decline in numbers. Why though? Well, the cruelty of the content was deemed a bit too much for comic book readers at the time. It had basically turned into a murder mystery about the death of Sue Dibney. Fans weren't on board with how dark the story got with certain details, some drawing the conclusion that it was done just for shock value. Fans have said that every character involved in that comic was just ruined. So what do you guys think? Agree, disagree? Comment down below. Number 5, Evil Amazons. Yeah, you heard that correctly. The New 52 comes through yet again to disappoint fans. The New 52 Wonder Woman series began in June 2016, and Brian Azzarello made the Amazons' origin so that they attacked sailors on the high seas that were too close to their land. Okay, and if that wasn't bad enough, Azzarello even went so far as to make the Amazons murder these sailors and then toss their bodies in the water. And if they have any sons, well, those sons are being sold right into slavery. I don't think we'll be seeing this in the Wonder Woman sequel. I mean, maybe? Imagine if they went from like the first movie to like a band of hardcore pirates just whipping people off boats. Get out of town. The Wonder Woman Clay origin was preferred over the new stuff. These false memories that were written to her story were liked. I mean, rightfully so. Number 4, What is Love? More like, Where is Love? Green Arrow and Black Canary are an iconic couple, or rather, were. The two have been together since their early issues in the 60s, and then the reboot came along in 2011, and they weren't lovers anymore. What? For 5 years, readers had to watch them not be in love, and it was a weird time. Eventually, DC listened, and then when DC Rebirth happened, the couple was back together again. Now, this made fans happy, of course, but that was 5 years of storytelling, and now those issues are just scrapped. Awesome, sick, 5 years. A lot of words, a lot of eye movements. Thanks. Number 3, Dead or Alive. Superboy issue 158 came out in 1949, so it was a little while back now. And the cover of the issue is enough to pull any reader in. It shows Superboy in space looking down at a capsule with his parents in it. And the words, "They're alive, my real mother and father." And behold, a couple of sleeping beauties. Jor-El and Lara were drifting in space for 15 years. The radio transmission comes in, calling Kal-El, and then he's like, yo, that's my name, let's do it, let's go. And it's a nice moment or two. Superboy reflects on recognizing his parents' voices, even though he was just a wee baby when he last saw them. So how sweet. But in the New 52 Rebirth storylines, apparently Jor-El survived the Krypton explosion, thanks to Dr. Manhattan, and he then became Mr. Oz, who was like a villain. This New 52 retcon makes absolute no sense. We saw Krypton's death, and we also saw his parents dying in it with our eyes. Number 2, Jack and Joe. We all know the name Joe Chill, the guy who killed Bruce Wayne's parents, Martha and Thomas Wayne. Now, after watching the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film, there's now another name in our minds when we think of the person that killed his parents. We of course think back to the Joker, and having him as the one who killed his parents in the movie. So which is the right one? Which one's true? So fans had to wonder this for years. If Joe Chill was actually the killer, these are confusing times. And then in Infinite Crisis issue 6, we see that Chill is again the killer of the Wayne's family. Thankfully, I mean, part of Batman's story was based off this way of things. And after Infinite Crisis, they made it so Chill was arrested the same night he killed Bruce Wayne's parents. These stories are way too confusing at times. Even reading this, my brain hurts. And finally, number 1, no kill. We all know Batman by his one rule, and breaking that rule is Joker's goal in the Dark Knight film, to never kill. Of course, having his parents die at the hands of a killer, one would assume he's not too fond of the act. But let's go back. Let's go back to Batman's first appearance. Back in 1939, Detective Comics issue 27. We straight up see Bruce push a guy into acid. Acid! It's said in the early days that many criminals died by the hands of the Bat. Bill Finger came in and retconned it so the Caped Crusader, starting in Batman issue 6, tells Robin that we never kill with weapons of any kind. With weapons? Ooh, gotta read the fine print, I don't know. No, Batman at that point still goes by the no kill rule. But what do you guys think? Was his actions, like in Batman vs Superman, unwarranted? I mean, this is obviously a darker, older version of the Batman where clearly people close to him died. I personally think he should kill. Make it so he pops dudes. People love the Punisher. I mean, you know, he wrecks people. Go get him, Batsy.
Number 10, the Three Jokers. At the bottom of our list is the Three Jokers story. This is because it isn't canon to the main DC universe, but the setup is. When Batman became the god of knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair, he became able to find out the answer to any question he asked. One of the first things he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. This was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story The Three Jokers, we learned that the reason the Joker acts so differently depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who killed Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who shot and paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer, Jeff Johns, stated that it was because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it, comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Personally, I think it's best this stays in Elseworlds, as it just opens up too many questions about Batman's already kinda weird continuity.
Number 9, Martian Manhunter. Put some respect on my boy's name. In the New 52 era, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was not a founding member of the team, a place that he held for years. Instead, his spot was taken by Cyborg, who was now created thanks to a mother box. This had a ripple effect of changing the important place Cyborg held in the Teen Titans, meaning it was erased completely. I personally liked the change a little bit. I always have felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites. But at the same time, John is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be the one of the original defenders of the planet. It may be a weak argument, and I know that many people weren't too happy with the changes to both the JLA and the Titans. Let me know your thoughts.
Number 8, Hal Jordan, from hero to villain to host. Hal Jordan was one of the most beloved and respected members of the Green Lantern Corps. When his home, Coast City, was destroyed by supervillains, he was consumed by grief. He tried to recreate his city and its inhabitants with his ring, but as this was against the ring rules, he was summoned by the Guardians of the Universe for judgment. He snapped and killed pretty much the entire Green Lantern Corps, taking their rings in hopes of becoming so powerful that he could restart the universe and save his city. He started calling himself Parallax and was now a villain. He eventually learned the error of his ways and sacrificed himself to save the day and died. DC eventually wanted to bring him back as Green Lantern, but realized that would be really hard with him having committed so much genocide since he was a hero. They retconned it so that he was actually being influenced by a yellow fear demon named Parallax who had taken over his mind. This allowed Hal to rejoin the Green Lanterns, be a member of the Justice League, and become the Lantern's golden boy again by absolving him of any responsibility for his actions.
Number 7, the Justice Society. One of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so that the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC's comic book history, both in the actual continuity and real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspect of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like such a strange choice to make. DC made a few weird choices with regards to retcons created during the New 52. Some were loved, some were not, but to fans, this one seemed just straight up rude. Just because Jay Garrick and Alan Scott are old news doesn't mean they aren't as important. Respect your elders, DC. Come on!
Number 6, Tim Drake. Robin no more? When the DC universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC editorial wanted to make their heroes younger and changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo or with Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked. But DC wanted to have their cake and eat it too, wanting a younger Batman, but still wanting to use characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd. In order to accommodate the new timeline, retcons to the various Robins' backstories had to be made. Dick and Jason got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim was originally introduced after Jason Todd had died at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne. Believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself, being the main boy wonder from 1990 until 2009 when Damian Wayne became the new Robin and Tim Drake became Red Robin. In New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never Robin, having apparently always been Red Robin. Fans hated this, and his original origin was eventually put back into canon. Another consequence of the New 52 was that in order to explain how Batman had a 10-year-old son, Damian was retconned to be a genetically engineered baby who had grown faster than normal.
Number 5. Identity. Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, but unfortunately, it is another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. Whether it was the super unnecessary and inappropriate use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which itself was an example of the crappy way women were treated in comic book stories in order to motivate the male hero, aka fridging, or the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman as well? It caused Bruce to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother I and created the OMAX. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice. It caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League. Also, can DC stop calling every damn event a crisis? I am in crisis just trying to keep track of them all.
Number 4. Jay Garrick. Fictional or nah? When Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, they explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So when Barry got powers, he took on the identity to honor him, making the Flash a cosplayer. This was retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally was transported to Jay's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe, and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that he had remembered and written down. As Barry explained, obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was turned in on Jay's vibratory Earth. This was a weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe, as this is also the introduction of the DC Multiverse.
Number 3. Jason Todd. Ah, yes, the over-aggressive black sheep of the Bat family. The poster boy for toxic Batman fans everywhere, and the most lazily written Robin of the bunch. At least at first. When Jason Todd first showed up on the scene, after the Robin mantle was abandoned by Dick Grayson, it was downhill from the start. For starters, DC made his backstory almost identical to that of Dick himself. Jason was part of a circus that was attacked by Killer Croc, which resulted in the passing of his parents, and that is when Batman took him under his wing and trained him to be Robin. This time it's the Killer Croc's fault. Very original, DC. I see what you did there. Very nice, yes. So already this Robin seemed to be the target of Batman for being exactly like his beloved Dick Grayson, but Jason wasn't Grayson, obviously. In a retcon, he was made to be impulsive, reckless, and rageful, probably because his mentor wanted the old guy back. I'd be mad too. Now, his backstory was reworked to make him a tough street kid whose parents succumbed to a life of crime and substances, but that's not the weird retcon. After his passing at the hands of the Joker, and technically at the hands of the fans, and after his resurrection as the Red Hood, he revealed to his sidekick that the cause of his streak of white hair was the fact that Batman had made the young Robin dye his hair from red to black in order to make him look more like Dick and avoid anyone asking about this new Robin's identity. Sure, it makes some sense, but my god, Batman needs to learn how to be a better Bat Dad. Number 2. Punching reality. In one of DC Comics' first and largest moves, the publisher removed all of the parallel Earths that they created during the Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age of comics in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was controversial even at the time, as it was a huge move that was meant to streamline their continuity and bring everything into one Earth. Unfortunately, the whole move was pretty pointless because it didn't take DC long to go back on that idea and retcon it, but they did it in what was honestly an incredibly odd way. We're talking comic books here, so there is a large suspension of disbelief that needs to take place, but making Superboy Prime punch reality just seems on another level. Being from an alternate reality himself, he got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he punched a hole in reality, which created the multiverse again and started the incredibly complex history of DC continuity, which only recently was reverted so that literally everything is canon if you want it to be. We did a whole explained on the DC continuity, so if you want to check that out, we will add a link for you right somewhere over here.
Number 1. Hawkman's origin. Hawkman has one of the most notoriously difficult origins to keep track of in all of comics, so I will be giving you an abridged version of his history. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall, spelled like this. Carter becomes Hawkman and fights crime. With me so far? When reintroduced in 1961, he is an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Carter Hall, spelt like this. He comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of an archaeologist named Carter Hall, with the original spelling. It makes sense when you think of him as a total reinvention of the original character. Where things start to get confusing is 2 years later when we learn that the two different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original archaeologist being on Earth 2. In 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all of the worlds are combined into one. How to handle the continuity? Well, they changed it so that they were two different people who just happened to have similar sounding names and were both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. In 1994, 0 Hour happens and all of the various Hawkmen become one guy, but it doesn't stick. In 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he has always been a space cop from Thanagar. In 2017, Carter with a C is reintroduced, with it being explained that he reincarnates because the knife he was killed with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship, kind of introducing elements of both of the origins. In 2018, we learned that the two versions have become one again, with the space cop being one of Carter with a C's reincarnations, retconning the character to be able to be reborn not just in different eras on Earth, but on other planets as well. So, to sum it up briefly, reincarnated Pharaoh becomes space cop, becomes two different people. He's retconned to have only ever been a space cop, and is retconned one last time to be a reincarnated Pharaoh who in one of his lives was an alien space cop. Which, when you say it like that, makes perfect sense. By the way, most of this can also be applied to Hawkgirl.
Number 10. Gwen's secret children. Norman Osborn slept with Gwen and they had twins in secret together. Shocking? You bet it was, but that is exactly what happened in this very strange retcon from Sins Past. It featured a reveal as well that Peter Parker was not in fact Gwen's first, which seemingly broke Pete's heart, despite the fact that it's been, years since Gwen has been alive at this point, and the fact that it's kind of just a weird thing to focus on, honestly, when it comes to this revelation. Especially when it comes to the caveat that your dead ex also apparently had twins in secret with one of your greatest enemies, and the person who ultimately, kind of killed her. I mean, you could say that Spider-Man killed her. You can debate that all you want, but I think Norman's presence was pretty crucial in that. And now, those twins have grown up, and they also think that you're their father and that you're responsible for their mother's death. So, all in all, just a weird thing for Pete to focus on, and just a very weird retcon in general. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here, and if you love when I get to smash the retcon button and talk about retcons, be sure to smash that like button to let us know you like it. Number 9. Kindred's Revelation. As weird as the previous retcon from Sins Past was, the good news is it's been retconned out of existence. Haha! This all happened during the end of Nick Spencer's run on The Amazing Spider-Man on ASM. In ASM issue number 73, which I honestly just collected because of this, it's explained to Norman by his son Harry, or I guess his son's vengeful kind of new demonic form, that Harry teamed up with Mendel Stromm and Mysterio when he was still alive to create an extremely convincing illusion, making it seem as though Norman had slept with Gwen when he actually hadn't. Gabriel and Sarah Stacy were actually not anyone's children, but simply test tube clones created based off of Norman and Gwen's combined genes. Kind of a weird retcon, but also kind of a great one. Number 8. Black Widow's Origins. Black Widow used to be a ballerina. Or at least she used to be. Initially, Black Widow's origins was that she was a ballerina who married the Russian super soldier superhero Red Guardian, and after he went MIA and was basically presumed dead, getting blowed up, she decided to join up and fight for her country, inspired and impassioned into patriotic dedication by his sacrifice and unfortunate fate. However, it turned out that he never really died, but that Russia had it appear as though he did in order to manipulate Natasha into becoming one of their agents. However, then it was retconned that Natasha never really even was a ballerina at all, but merely these had been memories implanted into her mind by the Red Room, whom she was in the care of actually for most of her life, at least according to one of the accounts of the various versions of her origins. It's also been implied that she was not actually inspired to join up with the USSR following the supposed death of her husband, but instead was blackmailed into doing so. Basically, her origin is one that we seem to constantly revisit and tweak, so it's kinda hard to keep up with. To be honest, I kinda wish she had actually just got to be a real former ballerina turned spy, because that just sounds like a cool origin story to me, but hey, implanted memories. Number 7. Aranya's powers. Aranya is Anya Corazon. For those who are unfamiliar with her character, she is another Spider-Man-like superhero from Earth 616. Despite sharing some connection to the world of Spider-Totems and Spider-like abilities, Anya was actually a pretty unique character in the sense that her power origins were more steeped in mysticism and magic. She was given her powers and her heroic calling after saving Miguel Lagar, a sorcerer from the Spider Society. She didn't get a radioactive spider bite, she got a magical spider tattoo. Anya had powers that gave her superhuman reflexes, wall crawling abilities, and super strength, but she also had a spider-like exoskeleton that she could produce, acting like a shield around her. She also had a power known as the Spirit of the Hunter, which kind of sent her into like a berserker rage. And because of her ties to the Spider Society, she was also extremely helpful when it came to reading prophetic scrolls that the Spider Army got a hold of during the Spider-Verse event. However, during Spider Island, her powers shifted to be basically just another carbon copy of Peter's instead, with her basically not having her original powers and then her just getting like Spider-Man's powers. Although at least now with Edge and End of the Spider-Verse, Anya does seem to be recovering her original powers, so they are coming back, but it was a weird retcon, and I was just like, but it actually ties into the Spider-Totem thing. Doesn't that make more sense? Spider-Totems are their own thing. Number 6. Franklin's origins. Franklin Richards is the son of Susan Storm Richards and Reed Richards. He is a member of the Fantastic Four and Future Foundation family, alongside his sister Valeria. While Valeria doesn't possess any superpowers of her own, at least not yet, although she is insanely smart, one of the smartest people in the Marvel Universe in fact, Franklin actually does have superpowers. Or he did. His powers are considered to be off the charts, or you know, at least they were. Franklin Richards had insanely powerful reality warping abilities that had been causing bouts of chaos, while also sometimes being insanely useful, ever since he was a baby. It was also believed that these powers were the result of him having an active and powerful mutant gene. However, as Franklin's powers recently struggled to remain consistent and eventually faded with time, he not only lost the powers, but he also lost his mutant status, which was revealed to be a result of him subconsciously reality warping his own DNA. This has made a lot of Fantastic Four fans upset, but also I'm still hoping it's leading us to something else. I'm still hoping it won't be a retcon forever and that something will shift. Maybe they had to do that because Franklin's going to be coming to the MCU and they were like, he can't be this powerful. We must nerf him in the comics. Number 5. Teresa Parker. Who is Teresa Parker? Honestly, after everything we've learned about her, that's a really great question, but one that isn't easy to answer. Initially, Teresa appeared in a non-canonical story, but ended up later being brought into the 616 continuity. There she was introduced as the possible mystery daughter of Mary and Richard Parker. Her birth being kept secret after the death of her potential parents, Teresa would be adopted and later would end up as a member of the CIA. As an adult, even she was unsure of her true parentage. It is implied, however, that she was the secret daughter of Mary and Richard, which would make her Peter's estranged sister. Eventually, her and Peter meet and even team up, but after we seemingly have somewhat confirmed her status as a Parker, although even that origin was still pretty shaky, it was later re-retconned that indeed she might not be. Chameleon attempted to manipulate Teresa, offering her alternative origins and even at one point suggesting that she may have come from the Chameleon Academy and be one of their own sleeper agents. Regardless though, Teresa addressed all the confusion of her origins by simply stating that regardless of her natural born parentage, she would always consider herself a Parker. So, hey, at least there's that. Does that make it any clearer? No. But at least we know where Teresa feels she stands. I think that's important. Number 4. Spider-Totems. I explain them a lot on this channel whenever we talk about them because honestly, they're kinda weird and most people are like, what's that? What's a Spider-Totem? To be fair, I do personally love what they have done as a concept for the Spider-Verse, basically bringing together like all the alternate versions of Spider-Man. So there's that, and I think that is a good part of them. So, okay, what are Spider-Totems? Where did they come from? Why? Why? Well, Spider-Totems are basically characters who are attached to the great web of life and destiny, who themselves are imbued with fated, spider-like powers thanks to their connection to, in essence, kinda like spider gods, who each represent a different archetype. With the concept of Spider-Totems, Spider-Man and other related characters with spider-like abilities went from being heroes as the result of a freak, radioactive, accidental spider bite, or some other, freak occurrence, to becoming heroes of destiny and fate. Some people like it, some people don't. But it is a thing that exists, and we must acknowledge. Number 3. Mr. Sinister's obsession. This has to be one of the weirdest retcons around. Although, I'm gonna be honest, I do kinda like this one. Mr. Sinister has always been known for being obsessed with the Summers family, especially Scott. This is seemingly because from a genetic standpoint, Scott Summers and his brothers have the most potential, with Sinister often believing that Scott's genes are actually the key to unlocking the most powerful mutant of all time. Typically, Sinister is a shipper of Scott and Jean together, and even went so far as to create a clone of Jean named Madeline Pryor to ship Scott with after Jean was believed to have died following the Dark Phoenix saga. I do not know where Mr. Sinister stands on the whole Emma Scott ship, however. In Sinister's own origin story as Nathaniel Essex, we later learn that this obsession with Jean and Scott together started before he was even Mr. Sinister really, with him meeting them when they traveled back to the past during a mission given to them by Clan Ascani. So basically, Sinister's obsession with Cyclops is kind of like a time paradox, because he met them as Nathaniel Essex before he met them as Mr. Sinister, but meeting them in their future, his past, made him obsessed with them in his future, their past. Number 2. Silk and Spider-Man. This is a really weird one, but thank goodness we've moved past it at this point, and even Dan Slott has admitted remorse for this weird plot point that was added into Silk's origins, as well as some other initial elements of her character that played into racial stereotypes. He has openly stated that if he even could go back in time, knowing what he knows now and hearing what he's heard from readers, he would have written things a lot differently. Honestly, a refreshing take to hear from a writer when it comes to a weird retcon that was not positively received. Silk is Cindy Moon. She was bitten by the same radioactive spider as Peter and also received spider-like abilities. Due to her and Peter sharing the connection of the same spider, which gave them their powers, she and Peter, for some pheromonal reason, had an uncontrollable desire for and attraction to one another. And I really do mean uncontrollable here. All in all, it was a weird thing that was pretty icky, to be honest, but fortunately we moved past that, and the connection no longer makes either spider-based superhero act like a horn dog around the other, so yay. Progress. Number 1. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's origins. Well, if you know me, you knew that we were going to talk about this because I must talk about it at every opportunity. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver have had a tumultuous origins, to say the least. Initially, they were the children of Maria and Django Maximoff, who became indebted to Magneto as young mutants after their lives were saved from an angry mob. Quicksilver's mutant powers allowed him to move and think at super speed, and Scarlet Witch's powerful but unpredictable mutant powers allowed her to hex her enemies, and sometimes honestly her allies, even warping reality at times to do so. They were initially portrayed as kinda bad luck powers in the comics, but would evolve to become more seemingly magical, being referred to as chaos magic, and also becoming powerful enough to allow her to warp the reality of an entire universe. We learn eventually that the Maximoff twins were not truly the children of the Maximoffs, but were simply adopted by the couple. They were the secret twins of Magda, Magneto's wife, making them, yes, Magneto's children. This would create a tense and interesting relationship between the three, with their family ties shaping much of their personality, complexes, and history throughout the years, and adding a lot of depth to Magneto's character. However, Marvel wanted to bring these two into the MCU. At the time, this was complicated, as Wanda and Pietro were mutants, which put them in a weird contested limbo, with Fox claiming rights to them due to them owning X-Men rights at the time, and Marvel claiming rights to them for film projects due to their frequent attachment to the Avengers, and they've never really been X-Men, so yeah. In order to make it so that Marvel could easily use the twins without it being contested in the MCU, they decided to detach them even further from mutant kind by retconning their origins during the events of Axis, with her alignment accidentally magically reversed as a result of a spell she herself had helped to cast. Wanda used blood magic to torment her own relatives, Quicksilver and Magneto, who were basically trying to talk her down at the time. While this worked on Pietro, it did not work on Eric, Garrick, proving that he was not really their father. The High Evolutionary provided further clarification in regards to this retcon, with it being explained that the Maximoffs were actually their real parents, with the High Evolutionary merely disguising them as mutants after abducting them and experimenting on them while they were young, which also granted them their powers. Later, Quicksilver would be implied to also possibly be an Inhuman, and Scarlet Witch's powers would be firmly cemented as straight up magic strengthened by her own Romani bloodline and heritage. So nothing mutant about either of them, apparently. So House of M, Avengers vs. X-Men, there's a lot of things that now don't quite make sense.
The retcon, retroactive continuity. This is basically when a comic book company changes the history of a character or an event in order for it to make sense with whatever story they are now trying to tell. And DC Comics is quite notorious for their use of the retcon. For example, when Batman became the god of knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair, he became able to find out the answer to any question he asked. One of the first things that he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. This was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story, The Three Jokers, we learned that the reason the Joker acts so different depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who took out Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who shot and paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer Jeff Johns stated that because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it, comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Now, some retcons are hard to believe, and others are both hard to believe and even harder to keep track of. For example, Hawkman, the whole character. His origins have changed many different times over the character's comic book existence. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall. When he was reintroduced in 1961, he was now an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Qatar Hall, who comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of archaeologist Carter Hall. Now, 2 years later, we learn that these 2 different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original being on Earth 2. Then in 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all the worlds are combined into one. So these 2 people were now both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. Then in 1994's Zero Hour, they make it so that these 2 are just one person. Then in 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he is and always has been a space cop from Thanagar. Then in 2017, it's explained that Carter Hall was actually a pharaoh who reincarnates because the knife that he was taken out with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship. And then finally, in 2018, it's decided that he can reincarnate not just on Earth, but on different planets as well. But Hawkman isn't the only victim of multiple origin retcons. Another character who got a similar treatment is Donna Troy. The story behind Donna gets more puzzling with each retcon. Donna has been an orphan found and raised on Themyscira as Diana's younger sister, and then she was changed to a creation from part of Wonder Woman's soul, and then she even became a young mirror image clone of Wonder Woman herself. In the pre-Flashpoint era, Donna got a new origin story that completely changed the previous one every couple of decades. It was so confusing that the new Teen Titans had a story arc called Who is Donna Troy from 1988 to 89 to try and clean everything up, but even the story to clean up the character was retconned. In the end, all these separate threads of Donna finally came together, and she was revealed to be an amalgamation of all the Donna Troys across the universe thanks to a spell, with all of her origin stories being memories of her other lives. Now, in one of DC Comics' first and largest moves, the publisher removed all of the parallel Earths that they created during the Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age of comics in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was controversial even at the time, as it was a huge move that was meant to streamline their continuity and bring everything into one Earth. Unfortunately, the whole move was pretty pointless because it didn't take DC long to go back on that idea and retcon it, but they did it in what was honestly an incredibly odd way. We're talking comic books here, so there is a large suspension of disbelief that needs to take place, but making Superboy Prime punch reality just seems on a whole other level. Being from an alternate reality himself, he got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he punched a hole in reality, which created the multiverse again and started the incredibly complex history of DC continuity, which only recently was reverted so that literally everything is canon if you want it to be. Now, DC's Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, but unfortunately, it is another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. From the super unnecessary use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which was an example of the way women were treated in comic book stories in order to motivate the male heroes, aka fridging, to the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things, there were just some really interesting choices made here. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman's mind as well? It caused Bruce Wayne to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother Eye, and created the OMAX. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice, and it caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind-wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League. But one of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so that the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC comic book history, both in the actual continuity and real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspect of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like a strange choice to make. DC made a few weird choices with regards to the retcons created during the New 52. Some were loved, some were not, but to fans, this one seemed straight up just rude. Just because Jay Garrick and Alan Scott are old news doesn't mean that they aren't as important, because they are. But moving on from that, when Jason Todd first showed up on the scene after the Robin mantle was abandoned by Dick Grayson, it was kind of downhill from the start. DC made Jason Todd's backstory almost identical to that of Grayson himself, with Jason being part of a circus that was attacked by Killer Croc, which resulted in the passing of his parents, and that is when Batman took him under his wing and trained him to be Robin. So already, this Robin seemed to be targeted by Batman for being exactly like his beloved Dick Grayson. In a retcon, he was made to be impulsive, reckless, and rageful, probably because his mentor wanted the old Robin back. Now, his backstory was reworked to make him a tough street kid whose parents succumbed to a life of crime and substances, but that's not the worst part. After his passing at the hands of the Joker and after his resurrection as the Red Hood, Jason revealed to his sidekick that the cause of his streak of white hair was because Batman had made the young Robin dye his hair from red to black in order to make him look more like Dick Grayson and to avoid anyone asking about this new Robin's identity. And sure, that makes some sense, but it makes Batman seem like an absolutely horrible Bat Dad. But going back to the New 52 era for this next point, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was now, in the New 52, not a founding member of the team, a place that the character had held onto for years. Instead, his spot was now taken by Cyborg, who was also now created thanks to a mother box. Now this had a ripple effect of changing the important place that Cyborg held in the Teen Titans as well, and by that, I mean it was erased completely. Now I personally liked the change just a little bit. I always have felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member of the Justice League felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites. But at the same time, John Jones is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be one of the original defenders of the planet. Now, when the DC Universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years, and now all the heroes are quite a bit younger. This unfortunately causes some problems, specifically for Batman and his Robins. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo, or with Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked, but DC wanted a younger Batman while still having characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd. Enter Retcons. Grayson and Jason Todd got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim was originally introduced after Jason Todd had died at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne, and believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick Grayson to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself. Well, in the New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never actually Robin. Instead, he had just always been Red Robin. And fans hated this, so much that his original origin was eventually put back into canon. Do you think that you know who Aquaman is? Did Batman used to run around sending criminals to the grave? Stick around and find out, because today on Top 10 Nerd, we're talking DC Comics retcons. And coming up first today, most DC fans recognize the hero known as the Spectre as one of the most powerful beings in the comic book universe. As a personification of God's spirit of vengeance, Spectre was an ancient force of pure justice, and he is so astronomical in his scope that he requires a human host in order to even be able to comprehend our human nature. One of the first of these hosts was Jim Corrigan, who was resurrected after his passing in order to become the host for the Spectre. But what may surprise some people to find out is that originally, during the Golden Age, Jim and the Spectre were actually just simply the same guy, with Jim just being a detective who would dress up as the Spectre and had some pretty cool ghost-like powers. The retcon here came when DC decided to split the two into two different entities entirely, making the Spectre one of the most powerful beings to exist in their comics. Now, during the first part of this list, we talked about how during the New 52 reboot, DC had altered the Justice League's starting lineup, replacing Martian Manhunter with the Earthbound hero Cyborg. Now, when Cyborg first showed up on the scene, he was a star football player who got extremely injured, which led to his scientist father to merge his body with advanced technology to create the technological hero who then debuted as a member of the Teen Titans. Well, alongside his new debut as a founding member of the Justice League, his origin was also slightly tweaked to have it so that the advanced technology that he was merged with was now a mother box from Darkseid's world of Apocalypse. This was a huge boost up in his actual power, giving him a huge list of new abilities and making him much more significant in the conflict with Darkseid, who was the one who brought together this team of powerful justice-inclined heroes. And it became the new favorite origin as well, even being the origin shown in Zack Snyder's Justice League live-action movie. But moving on from that, anytime a new Batman movie is set to come out, one of the biggest questions anyone has is who is going to be playing Alfred Pennyworth. Alfred Pennyworth is the key member of the Bat family. Batman may be the Bat family namesake, sure, whatever, but Alfred is the sticky glue that holds them all together. He's a father figure, a mentor, a helping hand, and a dear trusted friend who has been in Bruce Wayne's life from the time Master Wayne was born. Well, what if I told you that actually, no, that was not always true. Back in Batman number 16 from 1943 is when the character of Alfred actually showed up on the doorstep of Bruce Wayne for the first time. Not as a childhood butler of the character, but as a disheveled and disgraced valet who had come to serve Bruce as part of Bruce's father's dying wish. Alfred was a completely new hire for Bruce Wayne. This eventually got retconned to make it so that Alfred had always been with the Wayne family from way back in the day, and I think all of us are very happy that that change stuck around. But sticking with Batman here for a sec, one of the key defining attributes of the Caped Crusader is his no-killing policy. Batman refuses to take a life, even famously repeatedly letting the Joker live despite all the the horrible crimes that he continues to commit, even against Batman's own Bat family. Batman just kinda has to believe that these criminals can be rehabilitated. So it's always a shock to fans of the character when they take a look at his earliest comics and see the Dark Knight wielding a 9mm, taking pot shots at criminals left, right, and center. That's right, the Batman, alongside almost all the other Golden Age heroes, had quite the itchy trigger finger. Now, admittedly, this was before the end of World War II, and once that conflict ended, comic books saw a big old conservative crackdown that eliminated Batman's affection for bullets and turned him into the guy who drawed the line at just beating criminals to the very brink of death, but not actually ending their lives, just severely maiming them. But moving on from Batman to another Justice Leaguer, the Flash is one character that I think people don't actually realize had an incredibly tragic life. Like, a lot of stuff has gone wrong for him, with one of the biggest being the passing of his own mother, which was then blamed on his father, who didn't actually do it. For a while, Barry Allen had been wiped out, but actually transported into the Speed Force. So when he returned in Final Crisis and Flash Rebirth, he had a big huge face-off with Eobard Thawne, his most iconic villain, the Reverse Flash. But DC brought a massive change to Eobard's character when they made it so that this time-traveling villain was actually the one to cause almost every single hardship the Flash had ever had, including the passing of his own mom. In Flashpoint Reverse Flash, we actually get to see Eobard traveling into the past and trying to end the Flash, but since he can't do that because he'll create a paradox and he can't take out Iris West, who's Barry's girlfriend or lover, he just decides to go back to Barry's childhood and make Barry's younger days a literal nightmare. He makes the young Barry fall downstairs, he makes him miss catching a baseball, makes him drop all his books and his papers. Eobard even snatched away the one friend that Barry Allen had, erasing him from the time stream completely. It's not funny, but just remembering the look on Barry's face as this full-grown man dressed in yellow just ruins his life, it kinda cracks me up. I'm sorry. Now, have you ever wondered how DC Comics first got their multiverse? When Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, DC explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, who was Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were actually the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So, when Barry got powers, he took on the identity of that hero to honor him. This was eventually retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally found himself transported to Jay Garrick's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe entirely called Earth 2, and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that Fox had remembered and written down. As Barry explained it, quote, "Obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was tuned in on Jay's vibratory Earth," which is a weird sentence. Now this was a super weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick back into the real world, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe because this is also the first introduction of the DC Multiverse in order to explain all the Golden Age heroes and how they existed at the same time as all the new heroes. But then they created a whole other problem, which is why we got the Crisis on Infinite Earths in order to clear everything up, which it didn't even do. I don't want to get into that though, so we're gonna move on. Now this one is one that I'm not sure if everyone knows about. I think like half the fans know and the other half have no idea. Basically, when Wonder Woman first came on the scene, the character being tied up happened to an increasingly uncomfortable degree. This was because her co-creator, William Moulton Marston, incorporated his, preferences into her stories and powers. Like, infamously, he made Wonder Woman's greatest weakness being tied up or subdued by a man. This was pretty quickly retconned even before the Comics Code Authority cracked down on comics in the 50s. Later writers didn't share Marston's interests and views and felt that Wonder Woman's weird and oddly specific weaknesses were unnecessary, not only unnecessary, but just a tiny bit sexist and humiliating as well. This major DC retcon went unnoticed for actually a really long time until some dedicated readers dug into Wonder Woman's past. But speaking of that, Arthur Curry is Aquaman. He's the guy. When people think of the blonde-haired, golden fish scale wearing hero, they are thinking of Arthur Curry. Or are they? Ooh. Arthur Curry is DC's official Aquaman. That part isn't wrong, but when you look at the Golden Age Aquaman, that is actually not Arthur Curry. That version of the character, who looks basically the exact same, with all the same powers, is actually just some unnamed water-based hero who actually kind of despises us regular Earth humans and fought against the Axis powers during World War II. DC had only introduced Arthur during the Silver Age of comics, and he became accepted as just the guy who had always been Aquaman. As he got more and more popular, DC just kind of quietly swept Golden Age Aquaman under the rug and pretended that they were the same person the whole time. It's actually kind of hilarious because the only reason no one realized was because, I mean, it's Aquaman. No one cared. Now when it comes to the Green Lanterns, John Stewart is pretty universally known as the serious, disciplined one, and that is mainly to do with the fact that he is a retired US Marine. But despite his current gruff, serious, hard reputation, a lot of people forget that when John Stewart first came on the scene, he was actually a pretty rebellious dude who actually had a background as an architect. He was chosen by the Guardians specifically because he was rebellious. Hal Jordan at the time was the Green Lantern's super conservative, serious main guy lantern, and they chose Stewart specifically to counter him. It wasn't until the animated series that John was finally introduced in the way that we actually know him today. Last but certainly not least today, I have decided to include what may just be the most hated retcon to grace the pages of the New 52 reboot, turning Lobo into Lamo. In Justice League 23.2 Lobo, it was revealed that the Lobo that we know, the big bike-riding, foul-mouthed, regenerating, Gene Simmons-looking space bounty hunter who pretty much every single comic book fan loved, was actually just an imposter. In actuality, a younger, short-haired, boring, generic as hell looking tiny little dude was actually the real, genuine Lobo. And to usher that change in, Lobo #1 gave us this new Lobo beheading the fan-loved version of the character and deactivating his healing factor. Needless to say, no one liked this version of Lobo, and if you did, I don't believe you and you're just saying that to be difficult. Thankfully, the original version of the character was restored to greatness and we can just forget this ever happened. Please.
Welcome to Retcons Anonymous. I have a confession to make. I, Amanda, am obsessed with retcons. The more emotional, more elaborate, and more bizarre they are, the more I love them. I mean, I have to start off with this one, don't I? It's just one of the worst ones in my mind. I'm still processing it. It just has stayed with me for so long. It haunts my nightmares. I wake up in a cold sweat almost every night and I just think, how is this possible? What is this injustice? How can Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver not be mutants anymore? Why am I so obsessed with this? How is it that they were never mutants to begin with somehow? This retcon's revelation spun out of the events of Axis. At one point, an alignment flipped Wanda attempts to fight against her family with a blood hex. The targets are Magneto and Quicksilver. Now, while the hex works on Quicksilver, it does not work on Magneto, proving that he is, in fact, not the father. That's how the truth was revealed, but it actually gets worse if you can imagine that. The explanation for all of this: the twins were kidnapped when they were very young and were experimented on by the High Evolutionary. What is it with the High Evolutionary and experimenting on everyone? Seriously. Sometimes I feel like he's just the most random villain. Who do you think is a random villain? Let me know. Can you think of someone even more random than Herbert Wyndham? I dare you. I dare you to find someone. He's so random. The twins grow up with no memory of this due to their age at the time, and he attempts to hide his experiments by disguising them genetically as mutants before he lets them go for some reason. Why mutants? Why? Another retcon which really grinds my gears and which I'm still patiently waiting to have undone is the retcon of Peter and MJ's marriage. More specifically, their marriage not existing. At the end of Nick Spencer's run, I actually thought a future where these two got back together might even be possible. I had hope. I was like, maybe this is gonna happen. Maybe we're on a trajectory to get there. It seemed like Peter was going to, I don't know, maybe even propose? But then Paul came along in Zebwell's run, and Peter and MJ broke up, and that was simply that. Maybe one day these two will finally get back together in the main continuity, but until then, at least we have the new Ultimate Spider-Man comic to look forward to, where Peter and MJ finally get somewhat of their happily ever after, and I'm honestly pretty happy for them. This next one, I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't even fully understand it when it first happened and I read it. I had to look up who this character really was, and the only reason I even had a clue and wasn't like completely lost here, even though I wasn't exactly sure who specifically the reveal was about in terms of like the name of the character, is because I had actually read pretty much everything leading up to this event in preparation for it. We are talking about the Empire event, in case you don't know, and the reveal that the Skrull Empress, Raquel, was still alive. Also, I don't know if I say her name right, but I say it like that, or I say it Raquel, because there's a lot of L's there. I'm not very good at pronouncing Skrull names, okay? Not only was Raquel still alive, but the retcon also allowed us to know that she was apparently the mastermind behind the whole Kree-Skrull alliance. She'd been working undercover ever since she died, or should I say, faked her death. The real story of what happened is Raquel pretended to perish on her homeworld, but instead basically just like teleported the heck out of there and left her daughter, Hulkling's mother, Princess Anel, and the rest of her homeworld to die. So yeah, if you were holding out hope that Raquel's survival meant that, you know, maybe Hulkling's, aka Emperor Doric VIII's mom was still around, sadly no. When it comes to my who is secretly a mutant bingo card, the X-Men's training area of the mansion known as the Danger Room was never on there for me. And yet here we are. As we continued to learn more about how awful Professor X was, one of the main reveals we got in that department, one of the strongest cases against him in terms of honestly how villainous he perhaps truly was all along or could be, was the reveal that the Danger Room had actually long ago become sentient, a technological, basically based mutant of their own. Professor X senses this with his telepathic powers, but chooses not to acknowledge it and reveal it to his X-Men. I mean, he could have just, you know, set Danger free, apologized, maybe found some common ground, welcomed her even into the new fold of his team potentially, and just built a new room. He does, after all, have a lot of money through his family's inheritance, let's not forget. But no, he instead kept this a secret and waited until it blew up in his face. So this wasn't only a retcon that was shocking in regards to the reveal of Danger being sentient, but also in regards to Professor X being that level of a jerk. Honestly, Kitty was right. This next one involves a character who feels like he'd be the king of dramatic reveals. But even this one for him caught me off guard. We're talking about Mr. Sinister, and the retcon that he isn't actually Mr. Sinister, or rather, he isn't the original Mr. Sinister. Or that is to say, he isn't Nathaniel Essex, not the Nathaniel Essex. And initially we thought Nathaniel Essex was Mr. Sinister. Well, initially the retcon was that the original Nathaniel Essex died. The origin was later again retconned further, expanded upon, to reveal that Essex actually didn't die, but instead was one of the few versions of himself of which Mr. Sinister was only one. Have you ever wondered why Sinister has that diamond on his head? That's because he is the diamond clone. There's also a spade, a heart, and a club. Each takes their symbol for the suits in a deck of cards, and each with their own evolutionary possibilities to explore. That was the mission they were given by Essex before he went away. Hence why Sinister's obsession is with mutant genetics. That was the intended purpose as dictated by Essex, who of course created him. When I heard about this next retcon, I was both elated and also honestly confused. That was my honest to goodness reaction. If you are familiar with the history of Nightcrawler's origin and the behind the scenes of it all, you know that Chris Claremont always intended for Nightcrawler to be the son of Mystique and her wife Destiny. Mystique, being a shapeshifter who can adopt any gender with assumed working parts, would mean that the two could actually have a child between them alone. However, the Comics Code Authority had other ideas, and Claremont wasn't even allowed to do more than kind of imply the long-term romantic relationship between Mystique and Destiny. It just wasn't a thing back then. We weren't allowed to do it. But then 2023 rolled around, a time when we have long been free of the CCA, thank goodness. And guess what? We did it. At this point, Mystique and Destiny's marriage has also been firmly established in the canon, and Nightcrawler's origin also got a fresh rehaul as a result. If you're wondering how this is possible considering Azazel's confirmed involvement in Nightcrawler's origin, don't worry, it's possible. And if you want to check it out, you can read X-Men Origins Blue. Azazel still even remains a part of the story, to be honest. He's just not as much of a parental figure as we were led to believe, which honestly kind of makes sense given the way he has treated Nightcrawler in the past, attempting to use Kurt simply as a bridge to Earth so he could escape prison in the Brimstone dimension. Yeah, not winning any Father of the Year awards there. Speaking of villains, would you believe me if I told you that Iron Man was one? Yeah, I didn't either. But that is exactly what happened in the Crossing event. Certainly an event of all time. It was messy and foggy in terms of continuity and reasoning, and also had some very extremely 90s costumes. How was Tony Stark a villain here? Well, it's revealed that he has been a sleeper agent of Immortus, a version of Kang, for years, who ended up being activated. It's a wild time. You should check it out. I still can't believe this one happened. I'm still reeling from the revelations attached to it. This is a retcon that affected a long-standing mutant ally, Moira McTaggart. Initially, during the early Krakoan days, it was revealed that Moira was a mutant with reincarnation abilities. And because of this, she was still alive and also was one of the founders of the New Mutant Nation, coming together with Professor X and Magneto to build it. Initially, it seemed like this was because Moira believed in the mutant cause. After all, she was a mutant herself. But later, we learned that her resentment of her powers and her multiple reincarnations, constantly losing in her fight to protect mutants throughout her multiple lives, had basically driven her insane. And she was instead secretly plotting the mutants' destruction this whole time, with the creation of Krakoa even being part of her plan. After being depowered, she teamed up with Orchis and became one of mutant-kind's greatest enemies, also becoming a cyborg. So you probably wouldn't even recognize her now. It's a crazy retcon. So many good folks were revealed to be villains, honestly, but this next revelation, however, is quite the doozy. It involved revealing that Captain America had been working for one of his greatest enemies, Hydra, all along. Yeah. Hail Hydra? I'm sorry, what? How did this happen? How did he even become a sleeper Hydra agent? Well, it turned out that this was actually retconned into existence by Kobik, a physical manifestation of the Cosmic Cube who was manipulated into changing Captain America's origin. In the end, Cap managed to still save the day after his former true self was freed from within the Cosmic Cube shards. The real Cap fought against his alternate version, and now Hydra Supreme, the Hydra Cap, and ultimately he won. So, handled. And finally, one of the worst retcons of all time, though fortunately it has been fixed, I'm happy to say. This retcon led us to believe that Gwen Stacy, Peter's first and in some fans' opinions truest love, actually had an affair with Spider-Man's greatest enemy, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, or at least one of his greatest enemies, I'd say. Their affair produced two offspring, twins. These twins were raised in secret apparently by Norman, led to believe that Spider-Man was their true father and that he was also responsible for the death of their mother. Neither of those things being true. Fortunately, a few years back, neither of these things being true. Alright, well, I mean, maybe he kind of had a hand in Gwen's death a little bit, but I don't think he's responsible for it necessarily. Fortunately, a few years back, we fixed this by making all of it a concocted falsehood that Harry, Norman's son, created to basically mess with his dad and get revenge on his father for mistreating him and undervaluing him.